Hi, my name is Jason Buffington. I'm the Senior Analyst at the Enterprise Strategy Group that covers data protection, and today we're going to talk about my perspectives on virtualization protection. At the beginning of last year, in 2012, at our annual IT Spending Intentions Report, we found out that improving data backup and recovery tied is the #1 planned investment for 2012. Interestingly, by the way, it actually tied with increased use of server virtualization. Virtualization's been on our list for a couple of years at the top, but it was neat to see data protection and backup show up on that. Now, by the way, the tactical backup and recovery showed up at #1. Improving business continuity and disaster recovery actually came on the list on its own at #6. And that same kind of tactical to strategic alignment we see between increased use of serveralization, tied at #1, with improving private cloud infrastructure coming in at #10 as well. Here's the deal. As virtualization continues to become more and more the mainstay of IT, legacy approaches for backing up a virtual environment become more and more of a challenge as the more and more that environment becomes highly virtualized. Now, in fact, when we asked people, how are you backing up your virtual environment today, we actually saw a wide range of answers. Some folks are still using agents inside of each guest. Some folks are using the hypervisor to snap. Some are using the storage layer to snap. They're using VSS and vStorage and VADP. There's all kinds of methods. Interestingly, by the way, though, is that 50% of all environments are actually still, or barely 50%, are still using guest-based, meaning there's still an agent inside a guest. And there's some reasons for that, but not as many as you might think. In fact, of those environments, 20% said that that was their primary means of backing up, if you look at the yellow bars on this chart. So let's talk about why is it important to reassess your data protection strategy in lieu of a highly virtualized environment. When I'm looking on the left-hand side of my screen is a physical server, and we can see the spikes in CPU in the upper left-hand corner in green, the spikes in storage in the lower left-hand corner in blue. This is your server. Now, this is your server getting backed up. Notice all the additional I/O that shows up in both CPU and storage, and that's because basically a traditional backup says, give me all the data that you've got as fast as you can. And so your CPU spikes, your storage spikes, etc. And that's okay in a physical server because most servers are dreadfully underutilized. And so you have all the headroom, and so a backup doesn't hurt. Now, if I virtualize that same production server, here's that same CPU load, the same storage load. But remember, that's only one VM running on a physical host. If I add another VM, there's its spikes, there's a third VM, and when I aggregate all that together, I can see this is what the host looks like. A lot more consolidation, so a lot more CPU is already in use, a lot more storage is already in use, and of course, you can see, here's where the punchline is. If I want to back up that environment, this is all the headroom I've got. It's just those little bitty dots in the top of our screen. So this is how much headroom I have, but remember, if I think about the old methods for backing up, this is how much headroom I need. Because those two sides don't line up, that's why we have to rethink our data protection strategy when it comes to highly virtualized environments. Because the reality is that what the backup solution wants to do, your virtualization host cannot tolerate. All right, so that's the problem. Let's look at a couple more things of the problems around virtualization. We asked folks actually, what are your primary challenges with backing up virtualized environments? And it might surprise you that most of them don't have to do with hypervisor support or application per se. It's around, can I recover the data? How do I figure out the bottlenecks in my environment? How do I know if my backup succeeded or not? If I do have a bottleneck, how do I identify those issues? See, if I have a physical server, I've got an agent, it's talking to a backup server, I know exactly where that data is moving, and I can figure out what's going right or wrong. When I'm backing up through a hypervisor layer or through a storage layer, there's a lot more gray zone between me and the workload itself. So when I figure out that I don't have recoverable data, where do I start that process? All the consolidation, all the things that make virtualization good, actually create new challenges for highly virtualized environments. It's one of the things that is breaking more IT than is fixing for some folks today. In fact, when we ask folks, how is virtualization as a challenge in data protection, you'll see that little blue wedge in the top of the screen says it's our #1 problem. And maybe it's not your #1, but that big yellow wedge that covers 50% of the respondents of our data protection survey said it was one of their top 5 challenges. And if you fill that out with the green, we see that that's in the top 10 challenge. In fact, barely 20% of the environment said that data protection of virtualized environments was not a challenge for them. For the other 80 plus some odd percent, this is a real problem. And it's why we see such an investment in data protection alongside server virtualization in 2012, 2013, and beyond. So let me give you some ideas of what you should be looking for as you start reassessing your data protection strategy in highly virtualized and private cloud environments. First and foremost, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you're looking for source-side deduplication. Look, if I've got a whole bunch of VMs, the reality is I've probably got a whole lot of machines that are running the same or similar OSs with similar applications, and all of those binaries are pretty much redundant. So I want to get that deduplication as close to those virtual machines and those hosts as possible, because if I don't, if I'm just using duplicated storage, then I'm going to back up all those VMs and all their OSs and all their binaries, and they're all going to go to the dedupe storage, and this dedupe storage is going to say, hey, I've already got that, and discard it. I want that dedupe discernment to go as close to the production workload as possible so that I'm not sending all that redundant data across the line. Now that's going to be a combination of leveraging, say, VMware's change block tracking, that's file system filtering, that's the NTFS journal, and you're using that in parallel with vStorage, VADP, VSS, etc. But you want to get that dedupe as close to the front as possible because that's what's going to reduce the overall infrastructure on backup. You also want to make sure that your deduplication is global across hypervisors. Because if I've got 20 hypervisors and each one's got, say, 20 VMs on it, it's great that I can reduce those 20 VMs per host down to a single set of application binaries. But if I got 20, 30, 40, 100 hosts, if I'm not deduplicating across those hosts, then I'm still sending way too much data to that deduplicated storage, which again, eventually we'll figure it out and discard most of it. But they're creating a huge I/O penalty along the way. Now, let me tell you how big a problem this is. In that same IT spending intentions report, we asked people, hey, we know you're buying disk. What are you spending that disk on? What's consuming all that storage? The number one, check this out, the number one reason people were buying new disk in 2012 was to support their data protection solution. The number three was around the replicated data going for their disaster recovery solution. So if I'm taking advantage of dedupe, global dedupe, source-side dedupe, etc., all of a sudden now I'm significantly reducing my overall storage spend. So that's enough on deduplication. Let me give you a few more things that you want to be looking towards. You're going to be looking for post-process application handling. Look, there's a lot of backup application vendors out there, and some of them will tell you they're agent-based. Others will tell you that's bad. You want to be agent-less. But even the agent-less ones will say, oh, but we have to put a small executable in the VMs just for certain cases. I don't care that you have to put an executable inside the guest. Here's what I care about. If you're putting an agent inside the VM because you want to back up the data the old-fashioned way, there's very few use case scenarios that actually legitimize that. For most folks, you're putting that agent there really for post-process. You've used VSS, you've used vStorage, you've got a good backup, but you have to be able to notify those applications, hey, you can go back to doing work, or it's safe to truncate your logs, or checkpoint, or whatever it happens to be. Now, whether your vendor calls that agent-based or agent-aided or whatever, the point is, if you're going to be a good citizen in a virtualized application, you want to make sure those applications stay groomed, and that's probably going to require some kind of injection of executables. You're also looking for something that offers monitoring and manageability. What you don't want, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine, is to be in this highly virtualized, easily managed private cloud infrastructure, and you've gone and provisioned these new VMs, and then you step out of that world and go over to your backup UI and then go and create the backup solution for it. You really want to have as much of an integration perspective as you can, if not from a manageability perspective, at least from a monitoring, how are things going? So you're looking for solutions that hopefully integrate either at the hypervisor layer or at the private cloud management tier. But one way or the other, you ought to be using less panes of glass to make sure that what you are provisioning and maintaining are also being protected adequately. Now, when we talk about backup solutions, there's certainly a large set of folks out there. In fact, using the blue bars, we see it's about a 53-47, so almost a half and half split between people that are using a separate solution for protecting their virtual environment versus those that are using a unified solution for protecting virtual and physical servers. But take a look at the yellow boxes. We see a huge uptick moving back towards the idea of using unified solutions. Now, the reason for that is because several years ago, backing up VMs was hard. And so there was a new group of vendors out there that said, look, we will focus on just solving virtualization protection. They got a huge lead in the market, and today they're still enjoying that 53-47 type split. But the reality is that between vStorage and VADP and VSS, backing up a VM on its own actually isn't that daunting anymore. And so we see that shift back towards there. And that's great from a manageability perspective, although I will tell you that really the battleground for virtualization protection isn't can I back up a VM? It's how agile can I be in my restore? And I think that's what the folks in that yellow box on the left are seeing is how agile can my restores be? The other things that we're looking for around this and some of those same trends is around the idea that we now live in a multi-hypervisor world. It wasn't that many years ago there really was a primary hypervisor that was suitable for enterprise and large mid-market environments. But today there's a lot more parity from a hypervisor perspective, and it really comes down more to manageability as much as the hypervisor itself. And with that in mind, you want to make sure that your data protection solution not only backs up VMware, but probably also backs up either Citrix or Hyper-V, as well as, of course, integrates into the management tiers to support those multiple hypervisor private cloud type infrastructures. And as I mentioned before, it's not about can I back up a VM, it's about how agile can my restore be. Can I restore my whole VM without having to first put it back to the original host? Can I do item level recoveries from within that VM, either at a file basis or maybe even a message level basis with an exchange? Those are the real distinguishing marks of where the virtualization protection scenario is today and will continue to evolve beyond. Got lots of resources for you at ESG. If you are in a VMware environment, certainly just a few months ago, VMware released VDP, the virtualization VMware Data Protection Appliance. You can check out my blog post on that, as well as my wrap-up from the last VMworld on all things data protection related to VMware. I also did blogs specifically around some best practices for agent and agentless type backups, and a summary of some of the things that you're here in a blog post called What IT Pros Should Look For in Virtualization Protection. You can find almost all of these on my blog, technicaloptimist.com, or follow me on Twitter as jbuff. To find me and all of my other friends at ESG, go to the enterprisestrategygroup.com. My name is Jason Buffington. Thanks for watching.